Daniel Harris, good morning to you.
Morning, hiya.
How's it going?
Yeah, well, thanks. How you well?
Yeah, good. So you saw our stuff on Twitter yesterday. Is there a bit of nostalgia, though, that recasts Alex Ferguson's Manchester United team as always perpetually swashbuckling? Or were there periods where actually the team played as football in any way as sterile as the stuff that we saw against West Brom last weekend, for example?
There'll always be nostalgia with something that was. So he is not recast as this cavalier who always did things in a particular way and always stayed true to the traditions and all the guff that we hear around these kind of things. But I think that sometimes it's played down slightly. So if you look at his 98-99 team, who won everything, went for it in every game. Didn't always work, but they did go for it in every game. And I think when you're assessing how good teams are and the quality of the football that they play, I think one of the main categories is against whom did they play it. So if you look at this Manchester City team, for example, if you look at Arsenal 2004 and you say, well, which great teams did they destroy playing that kind of football? The answer will be that this will be quite short. Whereas if you look at Fergie's team in 98-99, they scored 8 against Nottingham Forest, they scored 6 against Leicester, they scored 6 against Bromby. But you wouldn't even think about those games because what you do is you look at what they did in the Champions League against Barcelona, against Bayern Munich, against Inter, against Juventus. In those games, they went and they played brilliant football, and I think that is the main reason that we would remember that team is the ability to do it at clutch, to have the bravery and the confidence in your ability to do it at clutch. Whereas in 2018, for example, when they played Barcelona in the semi-final of the Champions League, they basically went out to win that tie 1-0, and they did. And that's a skill, but it shows you that Fergie wasn't averse to doing what he thought was necessary to get a result.
So if you were to compare and contrast those two teams, the 99 and the 2008 team, it seems to me from what you've just said that you definitely have more love for the 99 team.
Personally, I guess it's partly to do with how old you were. I was 20 in 1999. 98-99 was the first year I was in charge of my own football going. And so it'll never just be to do with the way that they played, but to do with where you were in your life at a particular time, which I'm sure is fascinating to everyone who's listening to this.
Not that they were a better team, that you were a better man.
Yeah, exactly. Some autobiographical details. Yeah. But I think the 08 team were amazingly competent at the back. And there's something to be said for that as well, that they were drilled and they knew what they were doing. That Van der Sar, Brown, Evra, Vidic, Ferdinand, there won't be that many better defences that I think that we've ever seen. And they went through the knockout stages of Europe, playing decent teams, and they conceded I think 1 goal to Lyon in the last 16, and then 1 goal to Chelsea in the final, and then clean sheets everywhere else. And that included 180 minutes against Barcelona, who were something of a mess, but also had Messi. So I think that there are different ways to do it, but when you're evaluating how teams play and how cavalier they were, the main thing I would always be looking at is who did you beat playing that way. And so if you look at Wenger's Arsenal teams, for example, they were amazing aesthetic destroyers of Charlton, but did they do it in Europe? Not often, not really, and definitely not in the knockout stages.
Yeah, that is the glaring miss, really, from Wenger's Arsenal career. If he'd won that one Champions League final, then you get the feeling that the credit in the bank that he would have would be so much greater. I guess this is kind of the conversation that we were having about Mourinho and how he doesn't, with the Manchester United fans, have any credit in the bank when it comes to playing brilliant football. There is last season's trophy, which was important, and the team has progressed in terms of like the nailed-on qualification for the Champions League, but there's no real sense of them being part of that grand tradition of Manchester United. And it feels almost as if Ferguson set that down with the template in 99 and then evolved it to a point where they were less exciting, more functionally brilliant, perhaps, and more consistently brilliant over the final few seasons. And so that's why Ferguson is allowed to evolve his style. Mourinho never had the cavalier thing or got the fans on side with that.
I think what happened with Fergie actually was quite interesting, was he sort of became a victim of his own history. So he won playing that brilliant football in 98-99, then the following year, I mean, I think they were still the best team in Europe, and they ended up drawing Real Madrid in the quarterfinals, and Madrid were a mess. Before United went to Madrid, the papers in Madrid were all about fear about what United were going to do to them. And Fergie, who'd gone to the 1960 European Cup final at Hampden Park, sent United out in the Bernabeu to play Di Stefano and Puskás. And so United played quite defensively, ended up drawing 0-0. which is look like a good result at the time because you assume that if you draw your away leg 0-0, if you're playing in a knockout in Europe, you're going to have to win at home generally. But then United played brilliantly at Old Trafford in the first half, couldn't score, and then just before half-time, Roy Keane scored an own goal. And instead of being patient and waiting to score the 2 goals that the balance of play looked like they were about to come, they went mad and they ended up conceding 2 more on the break. And rather than evaluate that game for what it was his team just doing a little bit too much, Fergie changed quite a lot after that and then looked to play tactics and looked to be canny. And it took him quite a long time to get to a point where his team were good enough at doing that. I guess it probably took Carlos Queiroz to organise the defence for him because he didn't really do that, and Cristiano Ronaldo to hit his stride before he had a team that was able to play in what we might consider to be a more European way. I think the thing with Mourinho is that you know what you're going to get with him, and I think that sometimes people underappreciate how good his Chelsea side were. That when you kind of have these conversations about who the best English clubs were, for me, it's United 2008, United 98, 99, and then Chelsea, and then Daylight. And they played some brilliant football when they had Robin playing before he contrived to fall out with him, because why wouldn't you fall out with your most talented player? But I think what's happened with United now is people are quite satisfied with what Mourinho's done to get United from where they were to where they are. And I dare say not many, if any, managers could have done that, taken United from 6th to 2nd, still using not just rubbish that Van Gaal bought and rubbish that Moyes bought, but rubbish that Fergie bought. I mean, look at the fullbacks, Valencia and Young, 2 wingers who aren't good enough to play for United, who Fergie bought a long time ago. But if you look at the attacking players that he has now, I feel like there are a lot of managers in world football that could be getting more out of them than Mourinho is. Yeah. And I don't get any sense that Mourinho is going to take them the rest of the way. There's not any sense of progress. And what he seems to want to do is just churn players, sell the ones he doesn't like, buy some new ones. There's no sense of a plan of a team evolving to become more of an agglomerate of individuals. So what you see is you see them against City and you see them against Chelsea, say, and there are some good players there. So every now and again they combine to do something good. But there's no sense of it coming. You don't anticipate their goals, what you do with a really good team, where you can see where they're about to score because they're imposing themselves, they're imposing their will on the opposition. With Mourinho's teams, that doesn't happen. It's just Pogba and Sanchez might link up because Pogba and Sanchez are class players, but that's it.
Yeah, it's a fluke. So just to go back, the 3 top Premier League winning teams, was that how you define them? Were Man United 99, Man United 08 and Chelsea?
So the way I look at it is I try to keep it objective and non-partisan, and I guess I am partisan in this and I support one of the teams. But instead of looking at how you play made me feel, which is important as a supporter and just as a lover of football, I guess I'd look at 3 criteria: what did you win, who did you beat, and what did you do in the biggest games? And what did you win is a purely objective standard. Who did you beat is difficult because if you happen to be in an era where the teams aren't that good, then hard luck. Like if you look at United 93-94, they beat Aston Villa into 2nd place and they beat Blackburn into 2nd place. They were a really good team, but unfortunately when you look back, they didn't beat anyone, and that is to their detriment. And similarly, even though they were hampered by the foreigners rule in Europe, they failed in Europe as well. So it's hard to include that team in the conversation, even if you think, well, actually, if they played all these teams in your mind, they'd have a good chance of beating them. So if I look at Chelsea, are the only other team who retained the Premier League. They got a lot of points. They did it in dominating style. They won from the front, and they did well in Europe as well. Although they didn't win the Champions League in those seasons, that same group of players got to the final in 2008 and were an unfortunate slip away from winning it. And then even many years later in 2012, when they did win it, that was still quite a lot of the nucleus of that team.
So which Chelsea team are you picking?
The 05-06 team. I guess they were basically together from 05 till, 09 really. They were, even 2010, that was basically a team that the nucleus of which didn't change much. Terry, Lampard, Pogba.
Yeah, I noticed you've studiously avoided mentioning Pep Guardiola's Manchester City. Daylight between them and the 3 that you mentioned.
For now, I mean, I look at that team and you can see there's a lot of scope for them to get better. I'm not disrespecting what they've done this season, which is phenomenal. They've played some unbelievable football. They've strolled the league in an unbelievable manner. But when I look at that criteria again, what did you win? 1 league and one Carabao Cup. Okay, that's good. Who did you beat? No one. I mean, I think we're more or less agreed that this United team are not good. and they're in second place in the league. So that's more or less no one.
If Liverpool win the Champions League, though, perhaps, then all of a sudden we recast that?
Sure. Then you look at what did you do in your biggest games, and what were City's biggest games? Because they made the league so easy, the biggest games were Liverpool in the Champions League, and they got walloped 5-1 on aggregate, and they collapsed in the first game. And then the other game was that once in a lifetime opportunity to beat United to the league, and they collapsed in that game as well. And these, to me, are quite big black marks. Andy will tell you, he knows what it's like to compete at an elite level. I'm sure he knows a lot better than me what it's like when the pressure's on. And certain teams are able to get through that. If you look at United, when United played Juventus in the first leg of the Champions League semi in '99, they got absolutely pasted in the first half. But they were able to hang in there, and they got out of there losing. They got out of there at 1-0 because there were players in that team, and people sometimes look at it in terms of, are they hard, are they snide? And then they look at Roy Keane saying, it's not really about that. It's players who are prepared to take the ball under pressure, to continue to be positive under pressure. And that 99 team was full of players able to do that. And that was why they were able to hang in that game and only get out of that first half 1-0 and end up winning the tie. Whereas City, when it got real at Anfield, they didn't have the characters, I would say, the personalities. If you look at that team, who in that City team do you think is hard, is snide, or just even is someone who's able to imprint their personality upon a game and raise the standard of the players around them? They've got some beautiful, amazing players, some of the best players we've ever seen. Silva and De Bruyne in particular stand out for me as wonderful players, but the only one who's got that kind of mongrel about them when I look at them is Aguero. He wasn't playing.
Yeah, moral courage is how John Giles defined it when we were growing up watching football on TV. All right, well, Daniel, you made a pretty good case, but one last question for you then about Mourinho. I kind of feel like the doomsday clock is ticking on Jose at the moment, and that, who knows, like they're saying in the papers today that he's okay to sell Pogba this summer if he wants to and if he decides to, but at some point the Glazers are going to look at that and go, you bought him, you spent all that money, you're responsible for buying him, you're responsible ultimately for pulling the trigger on that deal. And okay, so maybe we haven't lost any money on that, but at some point they want success for the input.
Absolutely. I think that what we'll see with Mourinho is he'll get one more year, but if he's not in a much better position this time next year, then he's going to be in a lot of trouble. And it's not even about the players so much. I think Pogba's a brilliant player. And the other day I watched a video of Pogba at the beginning of the season, like a compilation, one of those things you see on Twitter basically, and I'd forgotten that he was able to move that fast. And that's obviously a problem of Pogba, that it doesn't look to me like he's putting it in, assuming he's fit, but Mourinho should be getting more out of him as well. And he seemed to, when he first arrived at United, he seemed to buy players, Mkhitaryan and Pogba, to try and prevent him from being his worst self. If I buy these artists, then it'll be impossible for me to play the kind of football that I play, and I'll be playing this football that we all talk guff about the kind of football that Manchester United play. But what's actually happened is the players that he loves are Matic, who to me is nowhere near good enough to play in the position that he plays in for United. If he's so good, why do United get the ball forward so quickly, given that that's his job? Why is the defence so inadequately protected if that's his job? But these are his undroppables, Matic and Lukaku. And I think it's hard to see the football improving, even if, let's say, he sells Pogba and he buys two excellent midfield players with that money and a right winger, which is possible. Do I trust Mourinho to get it right subsequently? Not particularly, because nothing I've seen shows me that he's got a plan. He waited. He doesn't like Martial. He hasn't liked him from the beginning. But Martial was playing brilliantly. He bought Sanchez and put him on the left wing. The only part of the team, the attacking part of the team, that has functioned properly this season has been the left of the attack, whether it's been Martial or Rashford. He buys Sanchez, immediately puts him on the left, and then chucks someone else onto the right, and it hasn't worked. And that shows me that it was an opportunist signing, not a planned signing. Yeah. And it was a signing that hasn't worked, and he's showing no signs of integrating all these players who are really good players into a formula that works, and that works when you're not playing well because everyone knows what they're doing. So there's a pro forma of behaviour that means that you're getting something out of the talents that are there, which is, it's just not the case at the moment.
Daniel, great stuff. Thanks very much for joining us this morning.
See you guys. Bye.